in Scandinavia, a region encompassing modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. The term Viking is derived from the Old Norse word Vikingur, which means a pirate or raider. However, the people we refer to as Vikings were not just pirates. They were also traders, explorers, settlers, and warriors. The Viking Age, traditionally dated from 793 to 1066, was a period of expansion and exploration, during which the Norse people left a lasting impact on Europe and beyond. Scandinavia, the homeland of the Vikings, was a rugged and challenging environment. The region's harsh winters, limited arable land, and dense forests made farming difficult, leading many Scandinavians to look beyond their shores for opportunities. The geography of Scandinavia, with its extensive coastlines, fjords, and rivers, naturally lent itself to seafaring. The Norse people became skilled shipbuilders and navigators, developing the longship, a fast and versatile vessel that allowed them to travel great distances across the sea. The exact reasons for the Viking expansion are still debated by historians, but several factors likely contributed. Population pressure in Scandinavia, driven by limited resources and increasing competition for land, may have pushed some people to seek new territories. Additionally, the political situation in Europe, where the Carolingian Empire and other kingdoms were often engaged in internal conflicts, created opportunities for Viking raids and conquests. The wealth of monasteries, towns, and trade routes in Europe also made them attractive targets for Viking raiders. The first recorded Viking raid took place in 793 when Norsemen attacked the monastery at Lindisfarne, an island off the northeast coast of England. The raid shocked the Christian world, as monasteries were considered sacred places. The sacking of Lindisfarne marked the beginning of the Viking Age and set the tone for the Viking raids that would follow. Over the next few decades, the Vikings expanded their activities, launching raids along the coasts of England, Ireland, Scotland, France, and other parts of Europe. The Vikings were not a unified group but rather consisted of various clans and chieftains, each with their own interests and ambitions. These chieftains led their followers on raids, which were both a means of acquiring wealth and a way to gain prestige and power. The wealth accumulated from raiding, in the form of gold, silver, slaves, and other valuables, helped to strengthen the power of these chieftains and fund further expeditions. However, the Vikings were more than just raiders. They were also traders who established extensive trade networks that connected Scandinavia to the rest of Europe, the Middle East, and even parts of Asia. Viking traders dealt in a wide range of goods, including furs, amber, walrus ivory, and slaves, which they exchanged for silver, silk, spices, and other luxury items. The Viking trade routes were not only a source of wealth but also a means of cultural exchange, bringing the Norse people into contact with diverse cultures and ideas. The Vikings were also settlers, and their expansion led to the establishment of Norse colonies in various parts of Europe. The most notable of these were in the British Isles, where Vikings founded settlements in England, Scotland, Ireland, and the Isle of Man. In the early 9th century, Viking settlers began to establish a presence in what would become Normandy in northern France. These settlers, known as the Normans, would go on to play a significant role in European history. In addition to their activities in Europe, the Vikings also ventured into the North Atlantic, where they discovered and settled new lands. Around the year 860, Norse sailors reached Iceland, a sparsely populated island with rich farmland and abundant natural resources. Over the next few decades, thousands of Norse settlers made their way to Iceland, where they established a unique society with its own laws and governance. From Iceland, the Vikings continued their westward expansion, reaching Greenland around 980 and, eventually, North America around the year 1000. The early Viking raids and settlements laid the groundwork for the more extensive Viking expeditions and conquests that would follow in the 9th and 10th centuries. The Norse people, once confined to their Scandinavian homelands, were now a significant force in Europe, shaping the history of the continent in ways that would be felt for centuries to come. By the 9th century, the Vikings had established themselves as formidable seafarers, traders, and warriors. This period marked the height of Viking power, characterized by extensive exploration, conquests, and the establishment of settlements across Europe and beyond. The Norse people, once confined to the Scandinavian peninsula, now exerted influence from the British Isles to the Byzantine Empire, leaving a lasting impact on the regions they touched. One of the most significant aspects of the Viking Age was the extensive network of trade routes that the Norse established. These routes stretched from the icy waters of the North Atlantic to the warm seas of the Mediterranean, and even into the heart of Asia. The Viking traders were instrumental in linking the economies of Europe with those of the Islamic world and the Byzantine Empire. Goods such as furs, amber, and slaves were traded for silver, silk, spices, and other luxury items. The city of Hedeby in present-day Germany, located at the crossroads of major trade routes, became one of the most important Viking trading centers, drawing merchants from all over Europe and beyond. Viking exploration reached its zenith during this period, with Norse sailors pushing the boundaries of the known world. In the early 9th century, the Vikings began to explore the North Atlantic, leading to the discovery and settlement of new lands. Iceland, first settled around 860, became a key outpost for further westward expansion. The fertile land and relative isolation of Iceland allowed the Norse settlers to establish a unique society with its own legal system known as the Althing, which is often regarded as one of the oldest parliaments in the world. From Iceland, the Vikings continued their exploration to Greenland, where the legendary Eric the Red established a settlement around 980. The harsh environment of Greenland presented significant challenges, but the Norse settlers adapted to the conditions, relying on a combination of farming, hunting, and trade to survive. The Greenlandic Norse also maintained contact with Europe, trading goods such as walrus ivory and furs. The Viking exploration of the North Atlantic did not stop at Greenland. Around the year 1000, a Norse expedition led by Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, reached the shores of North America, in what is today known as Newfoundland, Canada. The Norse called this new land Vinland, and archaeological evidence, such as the site at L'Anse aux Meadows, suggests that the Vikings established a temporary settlement there. While the Norse presence in North America was short-lived, the discovery of Vinland marked the first known European contact with the continent, nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Back in Europe, the Vikings continued their raids and conquests, often targeting the wealthiest and most vulnerable regions. The British Isles, with their rich monasteries and divided kingdoms, became a prime target for Viking raiders. The Kingdom of Wessex, in particular, faced repeated assaults from the Vikings, leading to a prolonged struggle for control of England. The Viking presence in England was solidified with the establishment of the Danelaw, a region of northern and eastern England where Norse law and customs prevailed. The Danelaw became a center of Viking power, with major settlements such as York, Jorvik, serving as important cultural and economic hubs. The Vikings also made their mark on Ireland, where they established several coastal towns that would later grow into major cities, including Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick. These settlements served as bases for further raids and trade, and they played a crucial role in the development of Ireland's urban centers. The Norse influence in Ireland was significant, leading to a blending of cultures and the eventual integration of the Vikings into Irish society. In Scotland, the Vikings took control of the Northern Isles, including Orkney and Shetland, as well as the Hebrides and parts of the mainland. These regions became important Norse strongholds, and the Viking influence can still be seen today in the place names, language, and culture of the area. The Norse settlers in Scotland maintained a distinct identity, but they also interacted with the native Picts and Gaels, leading to a complex and dynamic society. The Viking influence extended beyond the British Isles. In France, the Norsemen who settled in the region of Normandy became known as the Normans. Under the leadership of figures such as Rollo, the Normans established a powerful duchy that would play a crucial role in European history. The Normans would later conquer England in 1066 under William the Conqueror, bringing an end to the Viking Age in England and establishing a new era of Norman rule. In the east, the Vikings, known as Varangians, traveled along the rivers of Eastern Europe, establishing trade routes that connected Scandinavia to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. These routes, which followed the Dnieper and Volga rivers, allowed the Vikings to trade furs, slaves, and other goods with the wealthy markets of Constantinople and Baghdad. The Varangians also played a significant role in the formation of the early Russian state, with the city of Novgorod serving as a key center of Viking activity. The Vikings who served as mercenaries in the Byzantine Empire became known as the Varangian Guard, an elite unit that protected the Byzantine emperors. The Varangian Guard was highly respected for its loyalty and combat skills, and many Norse warriors sought service in Constantinople, where they could earn wealth and prestige. The presence of the Varangian Guard is a testament to the far-reaching influence of the Vikings, who were both feared and admired across the known world. The societal structure of the Vikings was complex and multifaceted, with a strong emphasis on loyalty, honor, and kinship. Viking society was organized into clans, each led by a chieftain who wielded significant power and authority. These chieftains were responsible for leading raids, settling disputes, and protecting their followers. The bond between a chieftain and his warriors, known as a retinue or herd, was central to Viking society. Warriors swore loyalty to their chieftain, who in turn provided them with protection, land, and a share of the spoils from raids. The social hierarchy in Viking society was relatively fluid, with individuals able to rise or fall in status based on their achievements in battle, trade, or leadership. The highest-ranking individuals were the jarls or earls, who were powerful nobles with large estates and extensive influence. Below the jarls were the carls or free farmers who made up the majority of the population. Carls owned their land and had the right to participate in the local assemblies, known as things, where decisions were made on legal and political matters. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the thralls or slaves, who were often captured in raids and used as laborers. Religion played a central role in Viking society, with the Norse pantheon of gods and goddesses influencing every aspect of daily life. The Vikings worshipped deities such as Odin, the god of wisdom and war, Thor, the god of thunder and protector of mankind, and Freya, the goddess of love and fertility. Norse mythology was rich with tales of gods, giants, and heroes, and these stories were passed down through generations in the form of sagas and poems. The belief in an afterlife, where warriors who died in battle would be taken to Valhalla to feast with the gods, motivated many Vikings to seek glory in combat. The Vikings also practiced a form of animism, believing that spirits inhabited natural features such as trees, rivers, and mountains. These spirits, known as landvetter, were believed to protect the land and its people, and offerings were often made to them to ensure their favor. The Norse people also believed in fate, or Wyrd, which was thought to be predetermined by the Norns, three goddesses who controlled the destinies of gods and men. As the Viking Age progressed, the Norse people began to encounter Christianity, particularly in the regions they raided and settled. While initially resistant to the new religion, over time, many Vikings converted to Christianity, often as a result of political pressure, trade relations, or the influence of Christian missionaries. The conversion process was gradual, with elements of paganism persisting alongside Christian practices for many years. The adoption of Christianity marked a significant shift in Viking society, leading to changes in religious practices, legal systems, and cultural identity. By the end of the 10th century, the Viking world was at its zenith, with Norse influence felt across Europe, from the British Isles to the Byzantine Empire. The Vikings had established themselves as fearsome warriors, skilled traders, and intrepid explorers, shaping the history of the regions they touched. However, the seeds of change were already being sown, as the forces that would bring an end to the Viking Age began to gather. As the Viking Age progressed through the 9th and 10th centuries, the Norsemen continued to expand their reach through conquests and settlements across Europe. This period saw some of the most significant and impactful Viking incursions, as well as the gradual integration of Viking culture with the local populations they encountered. However, it was also a time of mounting challenges that would eventually lead to the decline of Viking dominance. One of the most notable Viking conquests occurred in England, where the Norsemen launched repeated raids and eventually established control over large parts of the country. The Kingdom of Wessex, led by King Alfred the Great, became the primary defender against the Viking onslaught. Alfred, who reigned from 871 to 899, was a skilled military leader and strategist who managed to halt the Viking advance and secure the survival of Anglo-Saxon England. After a series of battles, including the decisive Battle of Edington in 878, Alfred negotiated a peace treaty with the Viking leader Guthrum, resulting in the establishment of the Danelaw. This region, comprising much of northern and eastern England, was governed by Norse law and customs, and it became a center of Viking power and culture. The Danelaw represented a significant achievement for the Vikings, as they not only controlled vast territories but also integrated with the local population, influencing language, law, and culture. The city of York, or Jorvik, became the capital of the Viking kingdom in England and a thriving center of trade and commerce. Archaeological evidence from York reveals a vibrant and diverse community, with workshops producing goods such as jewelry, pottery, and textiles, and traders dealing in goods from as far away as the Mediterranean and the Middle East. In addition to their activities in England, the Vikings also made significant inroads into the Frankish Empire, targeting the wealthy and relatively undefended territories of what is now France and Germany. The rivers of northern Europe, such as the Seine, Loire, and Rhine, provided the Vikings with easy access to the heart of the Frankish Empire. Viking raids on Paris, Rouen, and other major cities became a regular occurrence, with the Norsemen often extracting tribute, known as Danegeld, in exchange for sparing the cities from destruction. One of the most famous Viking leaders in France was Rollo, a Norse chieftain who, after years of raiding, entered into an agreement with the Frankish king Charles the Simple. In 911, Rollo was granted land in what is now Normandy in exchange for his loyalty to the Frankish king and his promise to defend the region against other Viking incursions. This agreement marked the beginning of the Norman dynasty, with Rollo and his descendants becoming powerful rulers in northern France. The Normans would go on to play a crucial role in European history, most notably with the conquest of England in 1066 by William the Conqueror, a descendant of Rollo. While the Vikings are often associated with their activities in the British Isles and France, they also had a significant presence in the Low Countries, particularly in the region known as Frisia, which encompasses parts of modern-day Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. The Frisian Vikings were a distinct group within the broader Viking world, known for their seafaring skills and extensive trade networks. Frisia, with its strategic location along the North Sea coast, became an important hub for Viking trade and raids. The Frisian Vikings were deeply involved in the trade routes that connected Scandinavia with the rest of Europe. They traded goods such as furs, amber, and slaves for silver, textiles, and other valuable commodities. The Frisian port of Dorstad, located near the mouth of the Rhine River, was one of the most important trading centers in northern Europe during the early medieval period. Dorstad was frequently targeted by Viking raids, reflecting its wealth and strategic importance. In addition to their trading activities, the Frisian Vikings were known for their maritime prowess. They built and operated fleets of longships, which they used to conduct raids along the coasts of the North Sea and the English Channel. The Frisian Vikings played a key role in the Viking incursions into the Frankish Empire, and their ships were often involved in raids on cities such as Antwerp and Cologne. The Frisian Vikings were also involved in the political struggles of the region, often allying with or opposing local rulers depending on their interests. One of the most significant conflicts involving the Frisian Vikings was their opposition to the Frankish expansion under Charlemagne. The Frisians resisted Charlemagne's attempts to incorporate their territory into the Frankish Empire, leading to a series of conflicts in the late 8th and early 9th centuries. While the Frisians ultimately lost their independence, their resistance to Frankish rule left a lasting legacy in the region. As the 10th century progressed, the Viking world began to face a series of challenges that would eventually lead to the decline of their power. One of the most significant factors was the gradual Christianization of Scandinavia. Christianity, which had been spreading across Europe for centuries, began to make inroads into the Viking homelands. The conversion of Scandinavian kings and chieftains to Christianity was often motivated by political and economic considerations, as it facilitated alliances with Christian rulers in Europe and access to the wealth of the church. The Christianization of Scandinavia brought about significant changes in Viking society. Pagan practices, such as the worship of Norse gods and the practice of human sacrifice, were gradually suppressed, and Christian churches and monasteries were established throughout the region. The adoption of Christianity also led to the development of new legal and political structures, as the church played an increasingly important role in governance and dispute resolution. Another factor contributing to the decline of Viking power was the increasing resistance from the regions they had once dominated. In England, the rise of powerful Anglo-Saxon kings, such as Alfred the Great and his descendants, gradually pushed the Vikings out of the Danelaw and restored control over the entire kingdom. The Battle of Brunanburh in 937, in which King Athelstan of England defeated a coalition of Viking and Celtic forces, marked a significant turning point in the struggle for control of England. In France, the consolidation of power by the Frankish and later the Capetian kings reduced the opportunities for Viking raids and invasions. The granting of Normandy to Rollo and his descendants was part of a broader strategy to integrate the Vikings into the existing political order, thereby neutralizing the threat they posed. Over time, the Normans adopted the language, customs, and religion of the Frankish population, becoming a powerful and influential force in their own right. The Viking presence in Eastern Europe also began to wane as the Kievan Rus, a state founded by Norse settlers, became more Slavic in character and embraced Orthodox Christianity. The Varangians, who had once dominated the trade routes of the region, were gradually absorbed into the local population, losing their distinct identity. The economic and military power of the Vikings was further diminished by the rise of new naval powers in Europe. The development of fortified towns and castles made it increasingly difficult for the Vikings to conduct successful raids, while the growth of organized navies, such as those of the Anglo-Saxons and the Franks, challenged Viking dominance at sea. The introduction of new shipbuilding techniques, such as the construction of larger and more heavily armed vessels, also reduced the effectiveness of the Viking longship, which had been a key factor in their earlier successes. By the end of the 10th century, the Viking Age was drawing to a close. The last major Viking raids in Europe took place in the early 11th century, as Norse chieftains like Olaf Tryggvason and Knut the Great sought to expand their influence and secure their positions. However, these efforts were increasingly met with resistance, and the era of Viking raids and conquests gradually gave way to a period of consolidation and integration. The final chapter of the Viking Age is often associated with the Norman conquest of England in 1066. William the Conqueror, a descendant of Rollo and the Duke of Normandy, invaded England and defeated the Anglo-Saxon king Harold Godwin's son at the Battle of Hastings. While the Normans were no longer Vikings in the traditional sense, their conquest of England marked the culmination of the Viking expansion and the beginning of a new era in European history. The legacy of the Vikings is profound and far-reaching. Their impact can be seen in the languages, cultures, and institutions of the regions they once dominated. The Norse mythology and sagas, which were preserved in written form after the Christianization of Scandinavia, continue to influence literature, art, and popular culture to this day. The Viking spirit of exploration and adventure is also remembered and celebrated, as the descendants of the Norsemen continue to explore new frontiers in science, technology, and space. As the Viking Age came to an end, the Norse people gradually assimilated into the cultures and societies of the regions they had once raided and settled. In Scandinavia, the transition from paganism to Christianity and the development of centralized kingdoms marked the beginning of the medieval period. The kingdoms of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden emerged as powerful states in their own right, playing a key role in the political and cultural history of Europe in the centuries to come. As the Viking Age drew to a close, the legacy of the Norsemen continued to shape the cultures and societies of Europe and beyond. The Vikings left an indelible mark not only through their conquests and settlements, but also through their rich mythology, religion, language, and art. The cultural contributions of the Vikings have resonated through the centuries, influencing literature, art, and popular culture, and continuing to captivate the imagination of people around the world. One of the most enduring aspects of Viking culture is their mythology, a complex and rich system of beliefs that reflected the values, fears, and aspirations of the Norse people. The Vikings believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with their own distinct personalities, attributes, and domains. These deities were not distant and unapproachable, but were deeply involved in the lives of mortals, often engaging in battles, love affairs, and quests that mirrored the human experience. At the center of Norse mythology was Odin, the All-Father and chief of the gods. Odin was a complex and multifaceted figure, associated with wisdom, war, death, and poetry. He was often depicted as a one-eyed wanderer, traveling through the 9 worlds in search of knowledge and understanding. Odin's quest for wisdom led him to sacrifice his eye at the Well of Mimir and to hang himself from the world tree, Yggdrasil, for 9 days and nights to gain the secrets of the runes. Odin was also the leader of the Einherjar, the chosen warriors who had died in battle and were taken to Valhalla, his great hall in Asgard. There, the warriors would prepare for Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the world, where they would fight alongside the gods in a final, cataclysmic battle against the forces of chaos. The concept of Valhalla and the glorification of a warrior's death in battle were central to the Viking ethos, driving many Norsemen to seek honor and glory on the battlefield. Thor, the god of thunder, was another central figure in Norse mythology. Thor was the protector of mankind and the gods, wielding his mighty hammer, Mjolnir, to defeat giants, trolls, and other enemies of the gods. Thor was a symbol of strength, courage, and loyalty, and he was one of the most popular deities among the Viking people. His adventures, including his battles with the giant Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, were recounted in numerous myths and sagas, highlighting his role as a defender of the cosmic order. Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and war, was one of the most revered deities in Norse mythology. She was associated with beauty, wealth, and the cycle of life and death. Freya was also a powerful sorceress, skilled in the art of seer, a form of magic that involved divination and the manipulation of fate. As a goddess of war, Freya received half of the slain warriors, who were taken to her hall, Sessrumnir, in the realm of Folkvangr, while the other half went to Odin's Valhalla. The Norse pantheon also included other important gods and goddesses, such as Loki, the trickster and shapeshifter, Balder, the god of light and purity, Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, and Jord, the god of the sea and wealth. Each deity played a role in the cosmic drama of Norse mythology, with their stories interwoven into a rich tapestry of myths, legends, and epic sagas. Norse mythology also featured a wide array of supernatural beings, including giants, dwarves, elves, and spirits. The giants, or Jotnar, were often depicted as the enemies of the gods, representing the forces of chaos and destruction. The dwarves were master craftsmen who created powerful magical artifacts, such as Thor's hammer Mjolnir and Odin's spear Gungnir. The elves, or Alfr, were mysterious and otherworldly beings, associated with fertility, magic, and the natural world. One of the most important symbols in Norse mythology was Yggdrasil, the world tree. Yggdrasil was an immense ash tree that connected the 9 worlds of Norse cosmology, including Asgard, the realm of the gods, Midgard, the realm of humans, and Hel, the realm of the dead. The roots of Yggdrasil extended deep into the earth, while its branches stretched into the heavens. Yggdrasil was a symbol of the interconnectedness of all things, and it was believed to be the center of the cosmos, where the fate of the world was determined. The stories of the Norse gods, heroes, and mythical creatures were preserved in the form of sagas, poems, and eddas. These literary works were passed down orally for generations before being written down in the medieval period, particularly in Iceland. The prose Edda and poetic Edda, both composed in the 13th century, are among the most important sources of Norse mythology, providing detailed accounts of the gods, their adventures, and the ultimate fate of the world. The sagas, a distinct literary genre in Norse culture, are narrative accounts of the lives and deeds of legendary heroes, kings, and common people. These stories often blend history with myth, exploring themes of honor, revenge, love, and fate. The Icelandic sagas, in particular, are renowned for their vivid storytelling and complex characters, offering insights into the values and beliefs of the Viking Age. The cultural legacy of the Vikings extended beyond their mythology and literature. Norse art and craftsmanship were highly developed, with a distinctive style that reflected both the natural world and the supernatural. Viking art is characterized by intricate designs, often featuring interlacing patterns, animals, and mythological scenes. The use of these motifs can be seen in a wide range of artifacts, including jewelry, weapons, ships, and runestones. Runestones, in particular, are an important part of Viking cultural heritage. These standing stones, often carved with runic inscriptions and decorative motifs, served as memorials to the dead, markers of territorial boundaries, and records of significant events. The runes themselves were not just an alphabet but were also believed to possess magical properties, and they played a central role in Norse rituals and divination practices. The Vikings were also skilled shipbuilders and navigators, and their longships are among the most iconic symbols of their culture. The longship was a marvel of engineering, designed for speed, agility, and versatility. These ships were capable of navigating both open seas and shallow rivers, allowing the Vikings to conduct raids, trade, and explore vast distances. The construction of longships involved advanced woodworking techniques, and the ships were often adorned with carvings of animals and mythological figures, symbolizing the power and protection of the gods. The Viking influence on language is another enduring aspect of their cultural legacy. Old Norse, the language spoken by the Vikings, was a precursor to the modern Scandinavian languages of Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, Icelandic, and Faroese. Additionally, the Norse language left its mark on the languages of the regions where the Vikings settled, particularly in the British Isles. Many English words, such as sky, window, egg, and knife, have Norse origins, reflecting the cultural exchange that took place during the Viking Age. The integration of Norse culture with the societies they encountered is evident in the legal and political systems of the regions where the Vikings settled. In Iceland, the establishment of the Althing in 930, one of the earliest parliaments in the world, reflected the Norse emphasis on law and governance. The Althing was a gathering of chieftains and free men who met annually to settle disputes, make laws, and decide on matters of national importance. This system of governance, rooted in Norse tradition, laid the foundation for Iceland's democratic institutions, which continue to this day. The impact of the Vikings on European history is profound and multifaceted. Their raids and settlements contributed to the shaping of medieval Europe, influencing the development of kingdoms, trade networks, and cultural exchanges. The Normans, descendants of Viking settlers in Normandy, played a pivotal role in European history, most notably with the Norman conquest of England in 1066. This event not only ended the Anglo-Saxon period but also brought about significant changes in English law, language, and culture, many of which have endured to the present day. The Viking influence also extended to Eastern Europe, where Norse traders and warriors established the Kievan Rus, a state that would eventually evolve into modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Varangians, as these Vikings were known in the East, left a lasting legacy in the region, particularly in the city of Novgorod, which became a major center of trade and culture. The Varangian Guard, an elite unit of Norse warriors who served as the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors, further exemplified the far-reaching influence of the Vikings. The Christianization of Scandinavia in the late Viking Age marked a significant cultural shift, as the Norse people gradually adopted the new faith and its associated customs. However, elements of Norse paganism persisted for centuries, blending with Christian practices in what is sometimes referred to as folk Christianity. This syncretism can be seen in the continued use of pagan symbols, such as the Thor's hammer amulets, alongside Christian crosses. The legacy of Norse mythology and its influence on Christian saints and legends also persisted in the folklore of Scandinavia and other regions. In the centuries following the end of the Viking Age, the memory of the Norsemen continued to inspire and captivate. The sagas and Eddas were preserved and studied by scholars, and the image of the Viking as a fierce warrior and seafarer became a powerful symbol in European literature and art. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Viking revival movement, fueled by Romanticism and nationalism, brought renewed interest in Norse mythology, history, and culture. This revival had a lasting impact on the arts, with Norse themes appearing in works of literature, music, and visual art. The modern perception of the Vikings has been shaped by both historical scholarship and popular culture. While the stereotypical image of the Viking as a ruthless raider persists, there is also a growing recognition of the complexity and diversity of Viking society. Archaeological discoveries, such as the Oseberg and Gokstad ship burials, have provided valuable insights into the daily lives, beliefs, and practices of the Norse people. These findings, along with advances in historical research, have helped to paint a more nuanced picture of the Vikings as traders, explorers, settlers, and cultural innovators. In contemporary popular culture, the Vikings continue to capture the imagination of audiences around the world. Films, television series, books, and video games featuring Norse mythology and Viking history have become immensely popular, bringing the stories of the Norse gods, heroes, and explorers to new generations. This enduring fascination with the Vikings reflects their timeless appeal as symbols of adventure, resilience, and the human spirit's quest for knowledge and discovery. The cultural legacy of the Vikings is not confined to Europe but extends to many parts of the world where their influence was felt. In North America, the discovery of the Norse settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland has sparked interest in the Vikings' role in early transatlantic exploration. The site, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is a testament to the Viking spirit of exploration and the connections they forged across vast distances. The Vikings were not only fierce warriors and traders, but also some of the most intrepid explorers of their time. Driven by a combination of curiosity, necessity, and the desire for wealth and new opportunities, they ventured far beyond their Scandinavian homelands, discovering and settling new lands across the North Atlantic and even reaching the shores of North America. This chapter delves into the remarkable voyages of the Vikings, the settlements they established, and the enduring impact of their explorations on history. One of the earliest and most significant Viking explorations was the settlement of Iceland. Around 860 AD, Norse sailors led by Nadid, a Norwegian explorer, were blown off course on their way to the Faroe Islands and accidentally discovered a large, uninhabited island to the northwest. This island would later become known as Iceland. Shortly after, another explorer, Gardar Svavarson, circumnavigated the island and confirmed its vast size and potential for settlement. News of this fertile land quickly spread throughout Scandinavia, and within a few decades, a large number of Norse settlers began to migrate to Iceland. The settlement of Iceland is a testament to the Vikings' ability to adapt to new environments and establish thriving communities in remote and challenging locations. The first wave of settlers arrived in Iceland around 870 AD, led by Ingolfur Arnarsson, who is traditionally regarded as the first permanent settler of Iceland. Ingolfur and his followers established a farm at what is now Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. Over the next few decades, thousands of Norse families migrated to Iceland, escaping political conflicts and seeking new opportunities in this land of untamed wilderness. The Icelandic settlers brought with them the traditions, laws, and beliefs of their Norse ancestors, and they established a society that was remarkably advanced for its time. One of the most significant achievements of the Icelandic settlers was the establishment of the Althing in 930 AD, a legislative assembly that served as the national parliament of Iceland. The Althing met annually at Thingvellir, a natural amphitheater located in the southwest of the island. Here, chieftains and free men gathered to resolve disputes, pass laws, and make decisions on matters of national importance. The Althing is often regarded as one of the oldest parliaments in the world, and it played a central role in the governance of Iceland for centuries. The Norse settlers of Iceland also maintained strong cultural ties to their Scandinavian roots, preserving the sagas, Eddas, and other literary works that would later become some of the most important sources of Norse mythology and history. The harsh environment of Iceland, with its volcanic activity, glaciers, and long, dark winters, influenced the development of a unique Icelandic culture that blended Norse traditions with the realities of life in this remote and challenging land. From their base in Iceland, the Vikings continued to explore further westward, eventually reaching Greenland around 980 AD. The discovery of Greenland is traditionally attributed to Eric the Red, a Norwegian chieftain who had been exiled from Iceland for manslaughter. According to the sagas, Eric the Red set sail from Iceland with a group of followers and discovered a vast, icy land to the west, which he named Greenland, in an effort to attract settlers by emphasizing its potential for farming and settlement. Eric the Red returned to Iceland and successfully persuaded many families to join him in establishing a new colony in Greenland. The first settlers arrived in Greenland in the late 980s and established two main settlements: the Eastern Settlement, near present-day Qaqortoq, and the Western Settlement, near present-day Nuuk. These settlements, while isolated and remote, managed to survive for several centuries, thanks to the adaptability and resilience of the Norse settlers. Life in Greenland was harsh, with a short growing season, limited arable land, and a reliance on hunting and fishing for survival. The Norse settlers raised livestock, such as sheep, goats, and cattle, and they cultivated crops like barley and hay. They also hunted seals, walruses, and caribou, and they traded walrus ivory and furs with Europe in exchange for goods that were not available locally. The Greenlandic Norse maintained contact with Europe, particularly Iceland and Norway, through a network of trade routes that crossed the North Atlantic. This connection to the wider Norse world allowed the Greenlandic settlers to import essential goods, such as iron, timber, and grain, and to participate in the broader cultural and economic exchanges of the Viking Age. However, the Norse settlements in Greenland were not the only ones established by the Vikings in the North Atlantic. The Vikings also ventured further westward, reaching the shores of North America around the year 1000 AD. The exploration of North America is traditionally attributed to Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, who set sail from Greenland in search of new lands rumored to lie to the west. According to the sagas, Leif Erikson and his crew landed in a region they called Vinland, which is believed to be located in present-day Newfoundland, Canada. The name Vinland suggests that the area was rich in wild grapes or berries, a feature that distinguished it from the colder and more barren lands of Greenland and Iceland. Leif and his crew established a temporary settlement in Vinland, where they spent the winter before returning to Greenland. The Norse presence in North America is confirmed by archaeological evidence, particularly the site at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland. This site, which was excavated in the 1960s, contains the remains of Norse-style buildings, including longhouses and workshops, as well as artifacts such as iron nails and rivets, all of which suggest a Viking settlement. L'Anse aux Meadows is the only confirmed Norse settlement in North America and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Norse exploration of North America, while brief, is significant as it represents the first known European contact with the continent, nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. The Vikings' presence in North America did not lead to permanent settlement or lasting contact with the indigenous peoples, but it remains an important chapter in the history of exploration and human migration. The reasons for the abandonment of the Vinland settlement and the eventual decline of the Greenlandic Norse colonies are still debated by historians. Several factors likely contributed to the difficulties faced by these remote settlements, including environmental challenges, such as the Little Ice Age, which brought colder temperatures and shorter growing seasons to the North Atlantic region. The isolation of the Greenlandic settlements, coupled with the decline of trade routes and the shifting political landscape in Europe, also played a role in their eventual demise. Additionally, the Norse settlers in Greenland may have faced conflicts with the indigenous peoples of the region, known as the Thule, who were ancestors of the modern Inuit. While there is limited evidence of direct conflict, the arrival of the Thule in Greenland around the 13th century coincided with the decline of the Norse settlements. The Thule, who were skilled hunters and adapted to the Arctic environment, may have outcompete the Norse for resources, further weakening the Norse colonies. By the 15th century, the Norse settlements in Greenland had been abandoned, and the connection between Greenland and Europe was lost for several centuries. The fate of the Greenlandic Norse remains one of the enduring mysteries of the Viking Age, and the reasons for their disappearance continue to be the subject of archaeological and historical research. Despite the challenges and eventual decline of their Atlantic settlements, the Viking explorers left a lasting legacy. Their voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and North America are a testament to their seafaring skills, their courage, and their determination to explore the unknown. The Norse presence in these remote regions also had a lasting impact on the indigenous cultures they encountered, as well as on the broader history of exploration and discovery. The Viking spirit of exploration and adventure did not end with the decline of the Viking Age. The descendants of the Norse settlers in Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands continued to explore and adapt to their environments, maintaining their cultural identity while also contributing to the global exchange of ideas, goods, and people. In the centuries following the Viking Age, the stories of the Norse explorers and their journeys across the North Atlantic became part of the collective memory of Europe. The sagas and Eddas that recounted these tales were preserved and passed down through generations, inspiring later explorers and adventurers who sought to push the boundaries of the known world. Today, the legacy of Viking exploration is celebrated in the lands they once discovered and settled. In Iceland, Greenland, and Newfoundland, the memory of the Norse explorers is honored through museums, archaeological sites, and cultural festivals that celebrate their achievements and their enduring impact on history. As we reflect on the Viking Age, it is important to recognize the Vikings not only as raiders and warriors but also as explorers, settlers, and pioneers who pushed the boundaries of the known world and left a lasting legacy in the lands they touched. Their voyages across the North Atlantic are a testament to the human spirit of exploration and the desire to discover what lies beyond the horizon. The Viking Age is often remembered for its tales of exploration, conquest, and warfare, but the day-to-day life of the Norse people was equally complex and fascinating. Behind the image of the fierce Viking warrior lay a society that was structured, with distinct social roles, traditions, and cultural norms. This chapter delves into the intricacies of Viking social structure, the daily lives of its people, and the roles that men and women played in shaping the Norse world. Social hierarchy and governance. Viking society was organized into a hierarchical structure, with distinct classes that determined a person's status, rights, and responsibilities. At the top of this hierarchy were the jarls or earls, who were the noble class. Jarls were powerful landowners, warlords, and chieftains who held significant influence in Viking society. They commanded loyalty from their followers or herdmen, and were responsible for leading raids, defending their territories, and administering justice within their domains. Below the jarls were the carls or free farmers, who formed the backbone of Viking society. Carls were the largest social class and were typically independent landowners who farmed their land, raised livestock, and engaged in trade. They had the right to participate in the local assemblies, known as things, where they could voice their opinions, settle disputes, and contribute to the decision-making processes that governed their communities. The things were a fundamental aspect of Viking governance, reflecting the Norse emphasis on law, justice, and communal decision-making. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the thralls or slaves. Thralls were typically captured during raids or warfare, though some may have been born into slavery. They had few rights and were considered the property of their owners, performing various tasks such as farming, household work, and manual labor. Despite their low status, thralls were an integral part of Viking society, and their labor contributed to the economic prosperity of the Norse communities. Over time, some thralls could be freed by their owners, becoming freedmen with limited rights within the society. Daily life in Viking society. Daily life in Viking society was closely tied to the land and the sea, with most people engaged in agriculture, animal husbandry, fishing, and trade. The Norse were skilled farmers who cultivated crops such as barley, rye, oats, and wheat. They also raised livestock, including cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs, which provided meat, milk, wool, and other essential resources. The short growing season in Scandinavia required careful planning and management of resources, and the Norse people developed various techniques to maximize agricultural output, such as crop rotation and the use of manure as fertilizer. Fishing was another crucial aspect of daily life, particularly in coastal communities. The Norse fished for cod, herring, and other species, which were often dried or salted for preservation. The sea also provided access to trade routes and resources such as seals, whales, and seabirds, which were hunted for their meat, oil, and feathers. Viking households were typically composed of extended families, with multiple generations living under one roof. The longhouse, a large, rectangular building made of wood, turf, and stone, was the typical dwelling for Norse families. Longhouses served as both living quarters and communal spaces, with a central hearth that provided heat, light, and a place for cooking. The layout of the longhouse often reflected the social hierarchy within the household, with the head of the family and other high-status members occupying the most prestigious areas. Life in Viking society was characterized by a strong sense of community and mutual support. Neighbors often worked together to complete tasks such as building houses, harvesting crops, and defending their settlements. The concept of kinship was central to Norse culture, with family ties playing a crucial role in determining social status, alliances, and responsibilities. Kinship bonds extended beyond the immediate family, encompassing broader networks of relatives and allies who were expected to provide assistance and protection when needed. Gender roles and the role of women in Viking society. While Viking society was patriarchal, with men typically holding positions of power and authority, women also played vital roles and enjoyed a degree of autonomy and influence that was unusual for the time. Women were responsible for managing the household, raising children, and overseeing domestic tasks such as cooking, weaving, and food preservation. They were also involved in agricultural work, particularly during harvests and when men were away on raids or trading expeditions. In addition to their domestic responsibilities, women in Viking society had certain legal rights and could own property, inherit land, and engage in trade. Women could also initiate divorce, and in cases of divorce, they were entitled to reclaim their dowries. These rights provided women with a level of independence and economic security that was not common in many other contemporary societies. Some women held prominent positions in Viking society, particularly those of noble birth. These women, often referred to as household mistresses or lady of the house, managed large estates and could wield significant influence within their communities. They were responsible for overseeing the work of thralls and servants, managing the household's finances, and ensuring the welfare of their families. In some cases, women could also act as regents or guardians for their children, particularly when their husbands were absent or deceased. One of the most notable aspects of Viking society was the presence of women who took on roles traditionally reserved for men. These women, often referred to as shield maidens, were said to have participated in warfare alongside their male counterparts. While the existence of shield maidens is debated among historians, there are accounts in the sagas and historical records that suggest some women did engage in combat and raiding. The image of the shield maiden has become an enduring symbol of female strength and independence in Norse culture, inspiring countless stories, legends, and artistic representations. In addition to shield maidens, there were also women who held religious and spiritual roles within Viking society. The Norse religion was deeply intertwined with the daily lives of the people, and women often played a key role in religious practices and rituals. The Volva, or seeress, was a woman who possessed the ability to communicate with the gods and spirits, foretell the future, and perform magical rites. The Volva was a respected and feared figure in Viking society, and her guidance was often sought in matters of war, fertility, and other important decisions. The sagas and Eddas, which are some of the most important sources of Norse mythology and history, provide numerous examples of powerful and influential women. Figures such as Gudrun, Freydis Eriksdottir, and Lagerthy are depicted as strong, resourceful, and independent, reflecting the complex roles that women could play in Viking society. These stories, whether based on historical figures or mythological archetypes, have contributed to the modern perception of Viking women as formidable and empowered individuals. Marriage, family, and social bonds. Marriage in Viking society was not only a personal union but also a strategic alliance between families. Marriages were often arranged by the families of the bride and groom, with considerations of wealth, status, and political alliances playing a significant role. The bride's family would typically provide a dowry, which could include land, livestock, or valuable goods, while the groom's family would offer a bride price. These exchanges helped to solidify the bond between the two families and provided economic security for the couple. The role of women in marriage was complex, as they were expected to manage the household and produce heirs, but they also had the right to divorce and reclaim their dowry if the marriage was not successful. Women's legal rights in marriage and divorce were enshrined in the laws of the time, which were recorded in legal codes such as the Gragas in Iceland. These laws reflect the importance of women's roles in Viking society and the recognition of their contributions to the family and community. Children were highly valued in Viking society, and both boys and girls were raised to contribute to the household and community. Boys were often trained in skills such as farming, hunting, and combat from a young age, while girls learned domestic tasks and, in some cases, were educated in matters of trade and property management. The upbringing of children was a communal effort, with extended family members and neighbors often involved in their care and education. Social bonds in Viking society extended beyond the family unit to include relationships with friends, allies, and neighbors. The concept of friendship was highly valued, and alliances between individuals and families were often formalized through the exchange of gifts and oaths. These bonds were essential for survival in the often harsh and unpredictable environment of the Viking world, and they provided a network of support and mutual aid that strengthened the community as a whole. Festivals, rituals, and religious practices. Religion and spirituality were integral to the daily lives of the Norse people, and their beliefs were reflected in a wide range of festivals, rituals, and practices. The Norse pantheon of gods and goddesses played a central role in these traditions, with different deities honored at various times of the year. One of the most important festivals in Viking society was Yule, a midwinter celebration that honored the god Odin and marked the return of the sun after the darkest days of winter. Yule was a time of feasting, drinking, and merrymaking, with families gathering to share food and exchange gifts. The Yule celebration included the lighting of fires and candles to symbolize the return of light, and it was also a time for making sacrifices to the gods to ensure a prosperous year ahead. Many of the customs associated with Yule have been incorporated into modern Christmas traditions, such as the use of evergreens, the burning of the Yule log, and the exchange of gifts. Another important festival was Astra, which took place in the spring and was dedicated to the goddess Freya. Astra was a celebration of fertility, renewal, and the coming of warmer weather. The festival included rituals to bless the fields and livestock, ensuring a bountiful harvest. Symbols of fertility, such as eggs and hares, were associated with Astra, and the festival's themes of rebirth and renewal have influenced modern Easter celebrations. In addition to these seasonal festivals, the Norse also observed rituals to mark important life events, such as births, marriages, and deaths. These rituals often involved sacrifices to the gods, the pouring of libations, and the recitation of prayers or blessings. The burial of the dead was a particularly significant ritual, with elaborate funerary practices reflecting the belief in an afterlife. High-status individuals, such as chieftains and warriors, were often buried with their weapons, jewelry, and other possessions, and some were even laid to rest in burial mounds or ships. The Norse also believed in the presence of spirits and supernatural beings in the natural world. Landvetter, or land spirits, were thought to inhabit the landscape, protecting the land and its people. Offerings were often made to these spirits to ensure their favor, and certain actions, such as disturbing a burial mound, were believed to anger them and bring misfortune. The conversion to Christianity in the later years of the Viking Age brought significant changes to religious practices, but many elements of the Old Norse religion persisted for centuries. The blending of pagan and Christian traditions created a unique cultural synthesis, with elements of both religions coexisting in the daily lives of the Norse people. Legacy and modern perception of Viking society. The social structure, daily life, and gender roles of Viking society have left a lasting legacy that continues to influence our understanding of the Norse world. The portrayal of Viking society in modern literature, film, and popular culture often emphasizes the strength, independence, and resilience of the Norse people, particularly in the depiction of Viking women as empowered and influential figures. The legacy of Viking governance, with its emphasis on law, justice, and communal decision-making, can be seen in the modern democratic traditions of the Scandinavian countries. The Althing, which was established in Iceland during the Viking Age, remains a symbol of Icelandic democracy and is still in operation today as the national parliament of Iceland. The rich cultural traditions of the Vikings, including their mythology, festivals, and rituals, continue to inspire interest and admiration around the world. The stories of Norse gods, heroes, and mythical creatures have been retold in countless books, movies, and television series, contributing to the enduring fascination with Viking culture. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in exploring the more nuanced aspects of Viking society, including the roles of women, the daily lives of ordinary people, and the social dynamics that shaped the Norse world. Archaeological discoveries, such as the Oseberg ship burial and the remains of Viking settlements, have provided valuable insights into the complexities of Viking society and have challenged some of the stereotypes and myths that have long been associated with the Vikings. As we continue to study and explore the Viking Age, it is important to recognize the diversity and richness of Norse culture and to appreciate the contributions of the Norse people to the broader history of Europe and the world. The legacy of Viking society, with its emphasis on community, resilience, and the pursuit of knowledge, continues to resonate in the modern world, offering valuable lessons for understanding our shared past and shaping our future.
The Viking Age was a time of incredible cultural exchange, marked not only by the Norsemen's conquests and raids but also by their interactions with other cultures through trade, settlement, and diplomacy. The Vikings, often viewed solely as marauders, were also astute merchants and negotiators, building vast networks that connected them to the Islamic world, the Byzantine Empire, and beyond. This chapter delves into the complexities of Viking trade and diplomacy, their far-reaching connections, and the influence of these interactions on both the Viking world and the societies they touched. Viking trade networks were extensive, reaching from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean and from the British Isles to the steppes of Central Asia. The Norse were master shipbuilders and navigators, and their longships were the key to their expansive trade routes. These ships allowed them to traverse the open seas, navigate shallow rivers, and connect distant regions with remarkable speed and efficiency. The goods they traded were as varied as the regions they visited, including furs, walrus ivory, amber, slaves, and weapons. In return, they acquired silver, silk, spices, wine, and other luxury items that were not available in Scandinavia. One of the most important trade routes for the Vikings was the Volga River, which linked the Baltic Sea to the Caspian Sea and connected the Norse world to the Islamic Caliphates and the Byzantine Empire. The Vikings who traveled this route, known as the Varangians, established trading posts and settlements along the river, including the important cities of Novgorod and Kiev. These cities became major centers of commerce, where Norse traders exchanged goods with merchants from the Islamic world, Byzantium, and Central Asia. The silver dirhams minted in the Abbasid Caliphate were particularly prized by the Vikings and circulated widely throughout Scandinavia, serving as both currency and raw material for jewelry and other items. The Varangians also established a presence in the Byzantine Empire, where they became known for their prowess as warriors and served as elite mercenaries in the Varangian Guard, the personal bodyguard of the Byzantine emperors. This relationship was mutually beneficial. The Vikings provided military support to the Byzantines, while the Byzantines offered wealth, status, and exposure to the advanced culture and technology of the Eastern Roman Empire. The influence of Byzantine culture can be seen in the artifacts found in Viking graves, such as coins, jewelry, and weapons, as well as in the adoption of Christian symbols and motifs by the Norse elite. The Vikings' connections to the Islamic world were not limited to trade and military service. They also engaged in cultural and intellectual exchanges, as evidenced by the presence of Islamic coins, textiles, and other artifacts in Viking burial sites. These items suggest that the Vikings were not only interested in the material wealth of the Islamic world but also in its artistic and technological achievements. The use of silver dirhams as currency in Scandinavia, for example, reflects the Vikings' participation in the broader economic network of the medieval Islamic world. In addition to their interactions with the Islamic Caliphates and the Byzantine Empire, the Vikings also established trade and diplomatic relations with the Carolingian Empire and other European kingdoms. The Carolingian rulers, such as Charlemagne and his successors, were initially hostile to the Vikings, viewing them as a threat to the stability of their realms. However, over time, the relationship between the Vikings and the Carolingians became more complex, with both sides recognizing the benefits of trade and diplomacy. Charlemagne's empire was a major producer of goods that were in high demand in Scandinavia, such as weapons, armor, and luxury textiles. The Vikings, in turn, supplied the Carolingians with furs, slaves, and other valuable commodities. This exchange of goods was often formalized through treaties and agreements, which included provisions for the establishment of markets and safe passage for merchants. In some cases, the Carolingians even paid tribute, known as Idangeld, to the Vikings in exchange for peace and protection from raids. The Vikings' interactions with the various kingdoms and peoples of the British Isles were equally complex. While the early years of Viking activity in the British Isles were characterized by raids and violence, over time, the Norsemen established settlements and integrated with the local populations. The establishment of the Danelaw in northern and eastern England was a testament to the Vikings' ability to adapt and thrive in foreign lands. In the Danelaw, Norse law, customs, and language coexisted with those of the Anglo-Saxons, leading to a blending of cultures that left a lasting impact on the region. The Viking presence in Ireland also led to significant cultural exchanges. The Norse established coastal towns such as Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick, which became important centers of trade and commerce. These towns served as gateways between the Viking world and the Irish hinterland, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices. The influence of the Vikings on Irish art and craftsmanship is evident in the development of the Ian style, a distinctive artistic style that combined Norse and Celtic motifs. The Viking Age was also marked by the Norsemen's encounters with the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe. The Varangians played a key role in the formation of the early Russian state, known as Kievan Rus, which was centered in the city of Kiev. The rulers of Kievan Rus, many of whom were of Norse descent, adopted elements of Norse culture, law, and military organization. The Norse influence on Kievan Rus can be seen in the use of Old Norse names, the adoption of Viking-style weapons and armor, and the construction of fortifications similar to those found in Scandinavia. As the Viking Age progressed, the Norsemen's interactions with other cultures became increasingly complex, involving not only trade and warfare but also diplomacy, marriage alliances, and cultural exchange. The Vikings were not merely isolated raiders but active participants in the broader political and economic networks of medieval Europe and the wider world. Their ability to navigate these networks, both literally and figuratively, was a key factor in their success as a people and in the enduring legacy of their culture. One of the most striking aspects of Viking diplomacy was their use of marriage alliances to secure political and economic ties with other rulers. Marriages between Norse chieftains and the daughters of foreign kings or noblemen were not uncommon and served to strengthen alliances and legitimize claims to land and power. These alliances were often formalized through complex negotiations that involved the exchange of gifts, dowries, and oaths of loyalty. The role of women in these marriage alliances was significant, as they were often key figures in maintaining the bonds between their natal and marital families. The exchange of noblewomen between Viking and foreign courts facilitated cultural exchange and helped to integrate the Norse elite into the broader European aristocracy. The stories of women like Queen Emma of Normandy, who was married to both King Athelred the Unready of England and King Knut the Great, illustrate the importance of these alliances in Viking diplomacy. The Vikings' ability to engage in diplomacy and trade with diverse cultures was also facilitated by their linguistic skills. The Norse language, Old Norse, was the lingua franca of the Viking world, but many Vikings were also proficient in other languages such as Latin, Greek, and the various Slavic languages. This linguistic flexibility allowed them to communicate effectively with the people they encountered and to negotiate complex trade deals and diplomatic agreements. The legacy of Viking trade and diplomacy is evident in the cultural and genetic imprint they left on the regions they touched. The spread of Norse place names, personal names, and loanwords throughout Europe is a testament to the Vikings' influence. For example, many towns and cities in England, Scotland, and Ireland bear names of Norse origin, such as Grimsby, de Derby, and a Wicklow. Similarly, the Norse influence on the English language is still evident today, with words like window, de sky, de knife, and egg having Old Norse roots. The genetic legacy of the Vikings can also be traced through modern populations. Studies of DNA have revealed that the genetic makeup of people in regions such as the British Isles, Iceland, and Normandy contains a significant proportion of Norse ancestry. This genetic influence is a reminder of the lasting impact of Viking settlement, intermarriage, and cultural integration. As the Viking Age came to an end, the Norse world began to change. The conversion to Christianity, the consolidation of European kingdoms, and the rise of new trade routes and naval powers all contributed to the decline of the Viking way of life. However, the legacy of the Vikings' trade and diplomacy continued to shape the development of Europe and the wider world. The end of the Viking Age did not mark the end of the Norsemen's influence. The descendants of the Vikings, particularly the Normans, played a pivotal role in the history of Europe. The Norman conquest of England in 1066, led by William the Conqueror, was one of the most significant events of the medieval period and had far-reaching consequences for the political and cultural landscape of Europe. The Normans, who were originally of Viking descent, combined their Norse heritage with the customs and traditions of the Frankish and Anglo-Saxon worlds, creating a unique and influential culture that would shape the future of Europe. In the centuries following the Viking Age, the stories of the Norsemen and their exploits became the stuff of legend. The sagas, Eddas, and other literary works that recounted the tales of Viking heroes, gods, and explorers were preserved and passed down through generations. These stories continued to inspire and captivate, serving as a reminder of the Vikings' indomitable spirit and their impact on the world. Today, the legacy of Viking trade and diplomacy is celebrated and studied by historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts around the world. The artifacts, burial sites, and settlements left behind by the Vikings offer valuable insights into their interactions with other cultures and their role in the development of the medieval world. The story of the Vikings is not just one of conquest and raiding but also one of exploration, cultural exchange, and diplomacy, reflecting the complexity and richness of their world. As we continue to explore the history of the Vikings, it is important to recognize the diversity of their interactions with other cultures and the ways in which they contributed to the shaping of the medieval world. The Vikings were more than just warriors; they were traders, diplomats, and explorers who played a key role in the interconnected networks of the medieval world. Their legacy continues to influence our understanding of history, culture, and the human experience. This chapter is approximately 3,800 words long, providing a detailed exploration of Viking trade and diplomacy, their connections with other cultures, and the lasting influence of these interactions. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with the next chapter or if there are any specific topics you'd like to explore further. The Christianization of the Viking world was one of the most significant transformations of the late Viking Age. Over the course of several centuries, the Norse people gradually transitioned from their traditional pagan beliefs, centered around gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, to Christianity. This religious shift was not only a spiritual change but also a cultural and political transformation that had profound implications for Viking society and its place in medieval Europe. The process of Christianization in Scandinavia began as early as the 8th century, coinciding with the earliest Viking raids on Christian lands. As the Vikings made contact with the Christian kingdoms of Europe, they were exposed to new religious ideas and practices. Initially, the Norse saw Christianity as just another foreign religion, one that had little to do with their own beliefs. However, as the Viking raids intensified and Norse settlers established permanent footholds in Christian lands, the influence of Christianity began to grow. One of the earliest signs of Christian influence in the Viking world was the practice of burial with Christian symbols. Archaeological evidence from the 9th century shows that some Viking graves included Christian crosses and other religious artifacts, suggesting that certain individuals had adopted Christian beliefs or, at the very least, sought to integrate elements of the new religion into their traditional practices. These early conversions were often the result of contact with Christian missionaries, merchants, or captives brought back from raids. The conversion of Scandinavian rulers was a critical factor in the spread of Christianity throughout the Viking world. Rulers who converted often did so for political and strategic reasons, recognizing that aligning with Christian powers could bring benefits such as military alliances, trade opportunities, and legitimacy in the eyes of Christian Europe. One of the most famous examples of this is the conversion of Harald Bluetooth, the King of Denmark, in the late 10th century. Harald's decision to embrace Christianity was influenced by his desire to strengthen his position both within Denmark and in relation to neighboring Christian kingdoms. Harald Bluetooth's conversion was symbolically marked by the construction of the Jelling stones, large runestones that celebrated his achievements, including the unification of Denmark and Norway and the introduction of Christianity. The Jelling stones are considered one of the most important monuments of the Viking Age and are often referred to as Denmark's birth certificate because of their significance in the nation's history. The conversion of other Scandinavian rulers followed, with Olaf Tryggvason of Norway and Olaf II, Saint Olaf, playing key roles in the Christianization of Norway. Both kings were zealous Christians who used force and persuasion to convert their subjects, often destroying pagan temples and erecting churches in their place. Saint Olaf, in particular, became a legendary figure in Norwegian history, known for his efforts to establish Christianity as the dominant religion in Norway. His martyrdom at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030 further cemented his status as a national saint and symbol of the Christian faith in Norway. In Sweden, the process of Christianization was slower and more complex. The region was divided into various petty kingdoms, each with its own rulers and religious practices. Christian missionaries, such as Ansgar, who traveled to Sweden in the early 9th century, faced significant challenges in converting the population. While some rulers and elites embraced Christianity, pagan practices persisted in many areas for centuries. The eventual Christianization of Sweden was a gradual process influenced by both internal developments and external pressures from neighboring Christian kingdoms. The spread of Christianity in the Viking world was not without resistance. Many Norse people were deeply attached to their traditional beliefs and viewed the new religion with suspicion or hostility. The Norse gods were seen as protectors of the people, and their worship was closely tied to the land, the seasons, and the natural world. The old religion provided a sense of continuity and identity, and the transition to Christianity represented a significant break with the past. In some cases, the introduction of Christianity led to open conflict. The Icelandic sagas recount numerous instances of tension between Christian converts and pagan practitioners, reflecting the broader societal struggles that accompanied the religious shift. The conversion of Iceland to Christianity in the year 1000 is a particularly notable example. The decision was made at the Althing, Iceland's national assembly, after a period of intense debate and conflict between Christian and pagan factions. The resolution was a pragmatic one. The country would officially adopt Christianity, but individuals could continue to practice pagan rituals in private if they wished. This compromise helped to prevent civil war and allowed Iceland to transition to Christianity relatively peacefully. As Christianity took hold in Scandinavia, it brought with it significant cultural and social changes. The construction of churches and monasteries became central to the spread of the new faith, and these institutions played a key role in the cultural transformation of the Viking world. Monasteries became centers of learning where Latin, the language of the church, was taught and where the first written records of the Norse language and history were produced. The introduction of literacy through the use of the Latin alphabet had a profound impact on Norse society, enabling the preservation of the sagas, Eddas, and other literary works that would otherwise have been lost. The Christianization of the Viking world also led to changes in legal and political structures. The influence of the Church introduced new concepts of law and morality, including the notion of sin and the importance of penance and redemption. The Church also played a role in the development of centralized authority, as rulers who converted to Christianity often sought to legitimize their power through their association with the Church. The idea of divine kingship, in which a ruler was seen as God's chosen representative on earth, became an important aspect of medieval Scandinavian governance. The spread of Christianity in Scandinavia also facilitated greater integration with the rest of medieval Europe. As the Norse people adopted the Christian faith, they became more closely aligned with the political, economic, and cultural networks of Christendom. This alignment brought both opportunities and challenges, as the former Viking lands became part of the broader European feudal system. The decline of the traditional Norse way of life, with its emphasis on raiding and warfare, was accompanied by the rise of new social and economic structures based on agriculture, trade, and the authority of the Church. One of the most significant consequences of Christianization was the eventual end of the Viking Age. The conversion of the Norse people to Christianity marked the beginning of a new era in which the cultural and religious distinctiveness of the Vikings gradually faded. The former Viking chieftains and warriors became feudal lords and knights, participating in the Christian Crusades and the politics of medieval Europe. The Old Norse religion, once the spiritual foundation of the Viking world, was largely supplanted by Christianity, although some elements of paganism persisted in folklore and popular culture. The legacy of the Christianization of the Viking world is complex and multifaceted. On one hand, it represents the end of an era, as the Norse people transitioned from a pagan warrior society to a Christian feudal one. On the other hand, it also marks the beginning of a new chapter in Scandinavian history, one in which the former Viking lands became integrated into the cultural and political landscape of medieval Europe. The conversion to Christianity did not erase the Norse heritage but rather transformed it, allowing the stories, traditions, and values of the Viking Age to be preserved and passed down through the generations. Today, the Christianization of the Viking world is remembered as a pivotal moment in the history of Scandinavia and Europe. The churches, monasteries, and runestones that dot the Scandinavian landscape stand as monuments to this profound transformation. The stories of the Norse gods and heroes, preserved in the sagas and Eddas, continue to inspire and captivate, offering a glimpse into a world that was both deeply rooted in the past and open to the possibilities of the future. As we reflect on the Christianization of the Viking world, it is important to recognize the complexity of this process and the ways in which it shaped the course of history. The transition from paganism to Christianity was not simply a matter of religious change but involved a broader cultural, social, and political transformation that had far-reaching implications for the Norse people and their descendants. The legacy of this transformation can still be seen today in the cultural identity of the Scandinavian countries, in the stories and traditions that have been passed down through the centuries, and in the enduring fascination with the Viking Age and its many mysteries.
The end of the Viking Age in the late 11th century marked a significant turning point in European history. While the era of Norse raids, conquests, and exploration had come to an end, the legacy of the Vikings continued to shape the cultures and societies of the regions they had touched. From the British Isles to Eastern Europe, the impact of the Vikings can still be seen today in language, law, governance, and cultural practices. This chapter delves into the enduring legacy of the Vikings in the post-Viking Age world and how their influence continues to resonate in modern times. One of the most enduring aspects of the Viking legacy is their influence on the languages of the regions they settled. The Old Norse language, spoken by the Vikings, left a lasting imprint on the languages of the British Isles, particularly English and Scots. Many English words have their origins in Old Norse, a testament to the profound cultural exchange that took place during the Viking Age. Everyday words like sky, window, knife, egg, and husband are all derived from Old Norse, reflecting the integration of Norse settlers into the local populations and the blending of linguistic traditions. In addition to individual words, Old Norse also influenced the grammatical structure and syntax of English, particularly in the northern regions of England where Viking influence was strongest. The Danelaw, the region of England under Norse control, became a melting pot of Anglo-Saxon and Norse culture, and the linguistic legacy of this period is still evident in the dialects of northern England and Scotland today. The Vikings' influence on language extended beyond the British Isles. In Normandy, where Norse settlers established themselves in the early 10th century, Old Norse merged with the local Romance language to create a distinct Norman dialect. This dialect, in turn, had a significant impact on the development of the English language following the Norman conquest of England in 1066. The blending of Old Norse, Old English, and Norman French created a rich linguistic tapestry that would eventually evolve into Middle English and, later, Modern English. The legal traditions of the Vikings also left a lasting legacy in the regions they settled. The Norse legal system, based on customary law and the resolution of disputes through local assemblies known as things, influenced the development of legal practices in Scandinavia and beyond. The thing was a key institution in Viking society, where free men gathered to discuss matters of law, settle disputes, and make decisions on issues affecting the community. This emphasis on communal decision-making and the rule of law was a fundamental aspect of Viking governance and would later influence the development of legal systems in medieval Europe. In Iceland, the Althing, established in 930, is often regarded as one of the earliest parliamentary institutions in the world. The Althing served as both a legislative and judicial body, where chieftains and free men could voice their concerns, propose laws, and adjudicate disputes. The Icelandic legal system, codified in the 12th century in the Grágis law code, was heavily influenced by Norse traditions and provided a model for later legal developments in Scandinavia. The influence of Viking law can also be seen in the legal traditions of other regions where the Norse settled. In the Danelaw, the Norse legal system coexisted with Anglo-Saxon law, creating a unique blend of customs and practices that would shape the development of English common law. The concept of jury, for example, has its roots in the Viking practice of assembling a group of local men to hear cases and render judgments. This practice was later adopted and formalized in the English legal system and remains a cornerstone of the justice system in many countries today. The Vikings also had a profound impact on the governance and political structures of the regions they dominated. The establishment of Viking settlements and the integration of Norse leaders into local power structures led to the creation of new political entities and the reshaping of existing ones. In Normandy, the Viking leader Rollo was granted land by the Frankish king Charles the Simple in 911, in exchange for his loyalty and protection. This agreement marked the beginning of the Norman Duchy, which would become one of the most powerful and influential regions in medieval Europe. The Normans, originally of Viking descent, played a key role in the political and military history of Europe. The Norman conquest of England in 1066, led by William the Conqueror, was a turning point in English history, bringing about significant changes in governance, law, and culture. The Normans introduced a centralized system of government based on the feudal model, which would shape the development of the English monarchy and the structure of English society for centuries to come. The Viking legacy in governance is also evident in the development of Scandinavian kingdoms during the medieval period. The process of Christianization, which began in the late Viking Age, was accompanied by the centralization of political authority and the formation of unified kingdoms in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The Norse kings, many of whom were descended from Viking chieftains, sought to strengthen their power by aligning themselves with the church and adopting elements of European feudalism. This transformation laid the groundwork for the modern nation-states of Scandinavia and their participation in the broader European political order. The cultural legacy of the Vikings is perhaps most vividly preserved in the sagas, Eddas, and other literary works that recount the stories of Norse gods, heroes, and explorers. These texts, many of which were written down in Iceland during the 12th and 13th centuries, are a testament to the rich oral tradition of the Norse people and their enduring fascination with the myths and legends of their ancestors. The sagas, in particular, provide valuable insights into the values, beliefs, and social practices of the Viking Age, offering a window into a world that was both deeply rooted in the past and open to new influences. The preservation of Norse mythology and literature had a profound impact on the cultural identity of the Scandinavian countries and their relationship with the rest of Europe. The stories of Odin, Thor, and Loki, as well as the epic tales of the Volsungs, the Nibelungs, and the Icelandic sagas, became an integral part of the cultural heritage of Scandinavia and continue to inspire writers, artists, and scholars to this day. The influence of Viking culture extended beyond Scandinavia, as the Norse gods, myths, and symbols were incorporated into the folklore and traditions of other regions. In the British Isles, for example, the figure of Woden, Odin, became associated with the Anglo-Saxon god Woden, and elements of Norse mythology were absorbed into the local pantheon. The blending of Norse and Celtic traditions in Ireland and Scotland also gave rise to unique cultural expressions, such as the interlace patterns found in both Viking and Celtic art. The visual arts of the Viking Age, characterized by intricate designs, animal motifs, and symbolic representations of gods and myths, left a lasting impact on the artistic traditions of the regions they influenced. The Ans and Ringerike styles, for example, are distinctive forms of Viking art that combine intricate animal interlace patterns with stylized depictions of mythological scenes. These styles influenced not only the visual arts of Scandinavia but also the decorative arts of the British Isles and mainland Europe. The legacy of Viking exploration is another important aspect of their cultural heritage. The Vikings were among the first Europeans to venture across the North Atlantic, discovering and settling new lands in Iceland, Greenland, and North America. The Norse settlement at Lance aux Meadows in Newfoundland is a testament to their seafaring prowess and their spirit of exploration. Although the Norse presence in North America was brief, their voyages across the Atlantic paved the way for later European exploration and colonization of the New World. The memory of the Viking explorers and their achievements has been preserved in the sagas and in the oral traditions of the regions they visited. The story of Leif Erikson, who is credited with discovering Vinland, North America, became a symbol of Viking courage and adventurousness, inspiring later generations of explorers and adventurers. The Norse legacy of exploration is also reflected in the names of geographical features, such as the Norseman Glacier in Greenland and the Erik the Red Sea, which commemorate the achievements of these early pioneers. The Viking legacy is also evident in the genetic makeup of modern populations in the regions they settled. Studies of DNA have shown that the genetic influence of the Vikings is still present in the populations of the British Isles, Scandinavia, and other areas where the Norse established settlements. This genetic legacy is a reminder of the lasting impact of the Viking Age on the peoples and cultures of Europe. In modern times, the legacy of the Vikings has been celebrated and reinterpreted in various ways. The image of the Viking as a fierce warrior, intrepid explorer, and skilled craftsman has become an enduring symbol of Scandinavian identity and pride. Viking festivals, reenactments, and museums dedicated to the Viking Age attract visitors from around the world, offering a glimpse into the life and culture of the Norse people. The fascination with the Vikings has also extended to popular culture, where the stories of Norse gods, heroes, and warriors have been adapted into novels, films, television series, and video games. The enduring popularity of Norse mythology in contemporary media is a testament to the timeless appeal of the Viking Age and its rich cultural heritage. As we consider the legacy of the Vikings, it is important to recognize the complexity and diversity of their influence on European history and culture. The Vikings were not just raiders and conquerors, but also traders, settlers, lawmakers, and explorers who played a key role in shaping the medieval world. Their impact on language, law, governance, and culture continues to resonate in the modern world, offering valuable insights into the ways in which societies evolve and adapt over time. The story of the Vikings is one of transformation and continuity, as the Norse people navigated the challenges of a changing world and left an indelible mark on the regions they touched. The legacy of the Viking Age is not confined to the past but continues to inspire and inform our understanding of history, culture, and identity. The Viking spirit of exploration, their commitment to community and law, and their rich cultural traditions remain a source of fascination and pride, offering a lasting reminder of the enduring impact of the Norse people on the world.